Welcome to the Girls Gone Sporty weekly live cooking show. This week, in honor of Valentine's Day, I am whipping up an oldie but a goodie. The oldie part is that the first time I made these no-bake chocolate drop cookies was probably when I was in 3rd grade. I remember whipping them up in my parents' kitchen with a friend, and they were delicious and I loved them, and I don't know why I forgot them for so many years, but I was trying to think of, okay, what's something that's pretty easy that you can make be a Valentine's Day treat, and this came to mind. Now I've revamped it a little bit, substituted in some new or different ingredients for some of the ones from the old school version, just to make it a little bit cleaner. Now don't mistake clean for low calorie or low fat, because there's plenty of both in these, so you don't want to go overboard, but you can feel good about the quality of the ingredients that you're putting into your cookies. So it's actually a very easy recipe. I whipped up a batch earlier today just to be able to show them off a little bit so you can see kind of what the final product looks like, especially since it takes a little bit to cool and I don't want to keep everyone hanging around while it cools. All you need is a saucepan, and go ahead and turn on your burner to roughly medium, maybe just a little over medium heat. You will turn it down in a little bit because there's a very low boiling point on a lot of these ingredients, but just to kind of help get things hot initially. Now what I have here is roughly 3/4 cup of coconut milk. Now the original recipe called for milk. I'm using coconut milk. It's just a little bit better for those who are, say, lactose intolerant. Then I have somewhere between a 1/2 cup and 3/4 cup of coconut oil. Now I'm using this in place of the butter that the original recipe called for. So again, at least you're getting your fats and your saturated fats from a plant source rather than from an animal source. So that is good, putting that in there. And you'll see that because there's coconut oil is solid over a certain temperature and liquid under a certain temperature, I believe it's around 76 degrees, the coconut oil will start to melt very quickly. So just kind of start stirring that around as it gets heated up. Then what I have here, and you can add a little more than this, you can use honey or you can use agave nectar. I am using agave nectar because I realized we were pretty much out of honey, but either one works. And then I'm using about 2 tablespoons. If you like your cookies a little sweeter, which I don't, you can add some more. The original recipe called for like 2 cups of sugar, which is just an insane amount of sugar. So I'm cutting down on the sugar significantly from, say, just a sugar source, and I'm using a natural sweetener instead. And again, if you want to use honey instead of agave nectar, by all means do so. So I'm putting in about 2 tablespoons of that in there as well. And then the original recipe called for about 4 tablespoons of cocoa powder. Now instead of using cocoa powder, I'm using actual dark chocolate chips. So I believe this particular brand of, I think it was Ghirardelli chocolate chips, it was 60% cocoa. So it's pretty dark, not the darkest possible, but there's also going to be some sweetener in here. So I'm using about a cup of these. You can use a little less. In my original recipe, or in this one over here, I used a little less than a cup, probably 3/4 of a cup of those. You just kind of add that in there. And what you want is for all those ingredients to melt and to start to boil. Now I love me some coffee with my cookies, and since I will be up late tonight like always, I'm gonna go ahead and make some coffee as well. I've already filled my coffee thing, so I'm gonna get that going. So you're already pretty much done with this recipe. The hard part's over. Yeah, so then we've got, you can add vanilla extract as well. The original recipe called for 2 teaspoons. And to be honest, I don't even know where the original recipe came from. I would direct you to it if I did. I just know it was in an old recipe cookbook that my mom had, and that I happen to remember. So I can't direct you there, I would otherwise. But there are tons of these recipes all over the internet for no-bake chocolate drop cookies, for chocolate peanut butter no-bake cookies. You can search for them. There are lots and lots of them out there. This is not a Laura original, but I've made some adjustments. So everything here is just about melted. So we want to get that up to boiling and then let it boil for about a minute as you stir, because it will start to burn if you don't kind of keep an eye on it and stir it pretty constantly. So after it starts boiling, because the boiling temperature is low on these things, we can turn the heat way down and it'll keep boiling even though the temperature is lower. It's not going to take too much longer here. Now, once this has boiled for roughly a minute, at that point we start adding our solid ingredients. So all we'll be adding is peanut butter. I used probably 3/4 of a cup earlier. I'm using a little less now. I'm using whatever's left in here. It's probably about a 1/2 cup. I'm using about 3 cups of old-fashioned oats. And then I'm gonna throw some coconut, just dried coconut in there. I threw dried coconut in these cookies as well, but I think I'm also gonna add some dried cranberries just because it'll be nice to get a little bit of that kind of sweet, fruity taste in there as well. I think it'll give it a nice little kick for Valentine's Day too. So I'm gonna add some of those in there, probably about a 1/4 cup maybe of the coconut shreds, and maybe about the same of the cranberries. You can start to see this is starting to bubble up around the edges and underneath. So that's what we want to see. And the end result will basically just be a hot mass of oats and goodness inside this pot. And then you just put it onto wax paper on your drying racks. I did go ahead and put my first batch into the fridge because they do need to cool down in order to get solid so that you can eat them like cookies. All right, so at this point you can see it's definitely boiling. So I'm gonna drop this temperature down to low, maybe medium low. And so at this point, this is where we kind of count down that minute. We don't want things to get out of control here or to get burnt, but we do want them to consistently boil for a little bit, get a little bit thicker. These are good things. But a low heat will keep it going. You can see that here. It smells good too, that chocolate smell. And you can see my finished product. I went ahead and I molded them just using my fingers into little hearts, which is a nice touch for Valentine's Day. You can wrap them up in wax paper and hand them out to friends at work or for your kids for school. Depending, I mean, there are peanuts, so that might not be the best for some schools, but it's an option. Or you could substitute almond butter in for the peanut butter. I don't know what the rules are at most schools about. I don't know if it's all nuts or if it's just peanuts that a lot of schools get a little bit nervous about, understandably. But there are options. All right, so we've been doing this here for about a minute. So what I'm gonna do is add the peanut butter in at this point. I'm just adding it all in there. You can see my coffee is starting to heat up and boil as well. I love stovetop coffee. If you're not familiar with it, you should familiarize yourself. It's basically espresso made without an expensive espresso maker. So I'm gonna go ahead, stir the peanut butter in there. Let that melt up a little bit as well. I'm gonna start stirring the oats in. I'm not gonna put the full, I have a little bit more than 3 cups in here. I'm not gonna put the full 3 cups in at first. Just start getting it nice and mixed. Kind of adding as we go. And the consistency should end up where the oats are pretty much soaked. There's not a whole lot of extra liquid left. I'm going to go ahead and add my coconut flakes and my cranberries in here as well, which is also going to help take some of that extra liquid. And my coffee is boiling, so I'm turning that one off. I'm going to add some of the cranberries too, just for kicks. And stir it up some more. And I'd say we are pretty darn good at this point. This is pretty much exactly where we want to be. So now you just take it off the heat. And it is as simple as, I'm going to use a new spoon, taking the mixture and putting it in spoonfuls on your wax paper. And there's no real rule about, how big or how small these spoonfuls need to be. You just continue on like that. And it's going to be pretty hot initially, so you might, if you do want to mold it with your fingers, you might want to let it sit for a little bit. Let me obviously make sure your hands are clean, but if you're wanting to mold them into shapes, they're really easy to mold just with your fingers. So right there, I have a nice little heart. And at this point, they are going to be nice, very soft. So at this point, you will not be able to pick them up individually and just eat them unless you just want to eat, like a handful of awesome tasting cookie dough, essentially. But after you either let them sit on the counter and really cool down for a little bit, or pop them into the fridge. Earlier, I think I had them in the fridge for 30 minutes before I checked them, and by the time I checked them, they had cooled completely. They'd formed nice, solid cookies. But just keep in mind, they do feel a little greasy, a little oily to the fingers. So you probably want to make sure you have paper towels around when you're eating them. But that is that. I need to finish doling out my mix onto my wax paper here, and I'm going to go ahead and have some coffee. I'll even pour myself some coffee. I heated up some water earlier. Go ahead and have some coffee with mine. But that's all there is to it. These taste delicious. They're not low cal, not low fat, but they are clean, and you can feel good about the ingredients that you're consuming. So consume in moderation, but enjoy them and have a wonderful Valentine's Day holiday. And let me know what you think of the recipe. And always subscribe, and check us out at girlsgonesporty.com. Thank you.